It's September 2016, and I'm up to my knees in mud. I'm with 36 Maya leaders in the heart of the last remaining untouched rainforest in the Americas. We're about to set out on a 12-hour journey through the jungle. I'm the only female and the only one without a machete. So I get myself ready, I button up my shirt as high as it can go, I tuck my pants into my thick black rubber boots, I unroll my sleeves and then duct tape them shut just to make sure that there's no space for these flying ants that are the size of golf balls to get in anywhere. I wrap my neck with bandanas and I put a bandana on my head. Yet within the first 2 minutes of being in this rainforest, I already have 5 bites on the back of my neck. So I'm walking with these Maya leaders who are wearing their traditional embroidered blouses and baseball caps. And they seem to be completely immune to any of these crazy flying ants. As we walk through the jungles, they're racing around, agile, running through trees and vines, as I take small steps, trying to make sure that my feet are landing on ground and not on the big anthills that are as high as my head. But what I remember most is the excitement and pride on their faces. You see, today is a very momentous occasion. The Maya people of southern Belize have just won their land rights in international courts over their lands and natural resources. This means that they get to be the decision makers in the development of their lands, and they get to pursue their vision of a more sustainable future for their people. The challenge is, though, that oil concessions have already been issued and an energy dam has been built, crushing 1,000-year-old sacred caves right in Maya villages. I thought, how could this be? They're the landowners. They have rights. But you see, the government of Belize does not believe that they are capable of their own development. And let me tell you why this is important to me. I grew up in Toronto, Canada, in the city. I went to law school. I bought a condo. And I went to work for the biggest corporate law firm in Canada. I worked with the biggest mining, energy, and infrastructure companies on the planet. And we worked on big deals, deals that were regularly featured on the front page of the business section of the news. My life seemed pretty perfect on paper, but I was not happy. My health was awful. I was always stressed, and I did not feel fulfilled in my career. So I jumped at the chance when my law firm sent me down to Peru to go meet with a mining client, and I thought, wow, maybe being on the ground will give me a different perspective. And I walked straight into a blockade with one of the communities next to this mining project. We're at 5,000 meters above sea level, high up in the Andes. You can barely breathe. So let me explain to you what a blockade in Peru really looks like. You see, you have these narrow roads covered in dirt and rocks, just big enough to be able to have one truck go through. And on the other side, a 5,000-meter drop, straight down to the bottom. And on one side, you have 7 mining trucks full of profitable minerals trying to get to port. And on the other side, you have an old beat-up truck from the communities. And behind them, 1,000 villagers sitting, women, children, and youth. You can see their hats and their traditional scarves shining in the sunlight. And they've been there now for 2 weeks. So I go up to the front lines, and I go up to Nico, the vice president of the community. And I sit down with him on these broken white plastic chairs. And I say, Nico, what's going on here? You know, the mining company has built you schools and hospitals. They financed heavy machinery to be able to help you with your agriculture. What's the problem? And he looks at me. And, you know, this guy is like a Matt Damon type, wears his heart on his sleeve, big smile, and he says to me, you know, they just don't care about us. They don't care. You see, they built the road right through the village, and the trucks, they pass by late at night throwing dust into the air that covers their toys, their children's toys, and causes them to cough late at night. They once had a very successful and proud cheese and dairy industry that won them prizes around the region. Now no one will touch their cheese because it's made from cows that graze next to the mining site. These are the things that are important to them, that someone shows that they care, that they have a voice. So I said, okay, Nico, let me get on the phone with the mining company. Let's see what we can do. So I get on the phone and I call Juan in the capital of Lima. You know, very powerful, smart, sophisticated guy in a slick business suit, you know, Nicolas Cage kind of guy with real authority. And I say, what's going on here, you know? And he says, well, I just don't understand. We've given so much. We've done so much for these people, and yet they still don't appreciate it. You see, the problem is, Juan is an engineer. He thinks in graphs and statistics. He measures human life based on risk and probability. Nico thinks with his heart. They don't speak the same language, even in the same country. And what I realized here was they needed a bridge. I saw an opportunity to bring together the empowered and disempowered, not only for their own benefit, for the benefit of the global collective. So I came back to Canada and I decided to quit my corporate law job, and I started a not-for-profit organization called the Global Indigenous Development Trust. And I have since spent the last number of years on the front lines with Indigenous people and industry from Canada to Peru, helping to bridge the divide and have Indigenous people be decision makers in the development of their lands and resources. But the real rock stars here are our Aboriginal leaders who run our board of directors. They are some of Canada's most prominent Aboriginal leaders who have been on the front lines, who have crafted policy and law and reform on natural resources across Canada for the last 40 years. And they are acting as mentors to help Indigenous communities around the world do the same. So I often get asked, who are Indigenous people? Yes, they live in the Amazon and they paint their skin and they wear colorful headdresses. But they are also successful business people, bankers, lawyers, teachers, police officers, and they are farmers and healers. They are the Inuit in the north, the Maya in Central America, the Aymara in South America, the Maori of New Zealand, and yes, the Dalai Lama. They are a people who have maintained a close connection to their lands and cultures since time immemorial. There are 370 million people across 70 countries, and they are the keepers of 80% of the Earth's remaining healthy ecosystems. And the more I talk to Indigenous people, what I've really learned is that they're just people like us. They want better opportunities for their children. They want a good life. They love getting likes on Facebook, and they get starstruck by Leonardo DiCaprio. But they've also maintained a close connection to their lands that has shaped their unique worldview. They have something to contribute that is worthwhile. I'm not an activist, I'm not an environmentalist, and I'm not Indigenous. I'm just like you. I care. Yes, I grew up with culture and values of tradition and language being important. My grandparents came from Ukraine. But more than anything, I am passionate about being human and about the real quality of life we can have on this planet. I grew up enjoying camping, hiking in nature, canoeing and swimming in the ocean. I am not interested in paying for oxygen or looking at trees in a museum. And while you might think that this sounds a little bit far-fetched, the reality is that when women my age, 35, are telling me that they are choosing not to have children because the future of the planet seems too dire, I know that I'm not that far off. So let me tell you about what Indigenous people can contribute. I'd like to share some examples of some successes that have worked. In one case, in the Rocky Mountains of Canada, a mine developer wanted to build a 70-kilometer road. You see, caribou in this region are really important to the local ecosystem. And because of the remote and harsh conditions of this region, there was no baseline data available to properly evaluate the impacts of what this construction and development project might mean. The original plans of this road were going to cut right through caribou migratory paths, disrupting entire ecosystems. So the Indigenous leaders of the region brought this to the developer's attention, and they sat down together and worked out a new plan. And they brought the information and knowledge of migratory patterns of the caribou over generations in order to properly predict the impacts that might ensue. So in the end, the road was built, and the caribou maintained their regular migratory pattern. But not all problems can be so easily solved. Let's take a more complex situation. There are thousands of abandoned mines around the world today, from pre-environmental regulation days. And they leak toxic chemicals into our waterways and soils for decades. One mining company in Northern Ontario decided to take on the job to rehabilitate one of these mines. So it cleaned up the site, it planted grass, it planted trees, put in a pond. It looked great. But the deer didn't come back. Neither did the foxes, not even a single bird. So the Indigenous leaders stepped in and they said, let us help. They contributed their knowledge of adaptive patterns of wildlife over time, the resilience of seeds and plants, and they were able to revive the entire ecosystem. All of a sudden, the deer came back, as did the foxes and then the birds. And I was there last year, and it's a thriving ecosystem. So with all of this, why do Indigenous people still not have a seat at the table? In decisions such as climate change, land and resource management, environmental sustainability, or sustainable development. I wondered, what's the missing piece? A number of years ago, we brought Nico and his community, 10 members, to Canada to learn about sustainable development and mining, to be able to have a stronger and more empowered voice at the table in their negotiations in Peru. And we took them to the leading experts in environmental science, in biology, in land management. And we took them to one biotech company that works on strengthening the roots of trees in areas really affected by climate change, as well as areas that are very arid and particularly hard to grow in, often regions around mining projects. And this was really complex information. I sat there thinking, wow, maybe we need to slow down. I'm having a hard time keeping up. After all, this is in English in Canada, and Spanish is now their second language after Quechua. And just as I'm about to interrupt and slow things down, Teo puts up his hand, says, I have a question. I say, yes, please go ahead. So then Teo says, okay, so from what we've learned here, is it possible then, if we were to apply this to our old traditional trees in our community, that they might be able to strengthen and rejuvenate the soil? And if we planted them in a certain way, it would create a microclimate, and that would improve the agriculture. That would then get rid of our malnutrition rates, because our malnutrition rates are at 90%. And then the microclimate might do better for the cows, because they're all suffering from lung disease because of the high altitudes and climate change effects. And then that would improve our production for our milk and our dairy. And that would improve our local economy because our extreme poverty rates are at 86%. So would that be a solution? Would that work? And I thought to myself, that is a moment where you completely underestimate an entire people. I felt very embarrassed that I had even doubted their capacity and capability in that moment. And I realized that Indigenous people do not come to the table with fancy credentials or degrees from prestigious universities. And so we don't see them as experts, and we don't consider their knowledge as expertise. And yet it is information and knowledge based on direct observation over millennia that is that exact information we need in order to be able to help us create a new relationship with our natural environment. So where do we go from here? Well, in the words of Desmond Tutu, Indigenous people of the world have an important gift to share. A reminder that we are built for harmony and for interdependence. If we are truly to prosper, it will only be together. So what we must do is we must give Indigenous people a permanent seat at the table as decision makers on issues of land and resource management, climate change, and sustainable development. We must value their traditional knowledge as equal to ours. And we must be open to change. So sitting on the jungle floor in Belize with my friend Christina, another Maya leader, and I look at Chris and I say, what message can we share with people? What else can we say? And she looks at me and she says, everyone has something to contribute to the betterment of society. We believe that the Maya people are prepared and ready to make our contribution. Thank you.